are the epitome of freedom. Freedom from restriction, boundaries, and arbitrary control. Freedom to roam the vast oceans at will, unhindered and unconfined. Without tether or bondage, they are free to wander, play, and explore. In a world older than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with senses we have lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never comprehend. Born free. Nature has intended them to remain free and exempt from domination. Free for now. But are these gentle giants safe from the hands of human tyranny? Ursinus orca, or more commonly known as the killer whale. They take our breath away with every majestic leap. Once regarded as simple predators, we now understand orcas to be complex, intelligent, and gentle creatures. In fact, they are not really whales at all, but the largest member of the dolphin family. They have a brain 5 times the size of our own, giving them an exceptional capacity for memory and communication. They are social beings, roaming the vast oceans in matriarchal societies of closely knit family pods. With precision sonar, they are great navigators, ruling the seas with power and grace. In Miami, Florida, there lives a very special orca, one with a remarkable will to survive. She is a 37-year-old performer named Lolita. Lolita was taken from the wild over 3 decades ago to be trained and put on display. Today, she is the remaining survivor of the Puget Sound roundups. On August 8, 1970, Lolita and her family were swimming peacefully off the coast of Washington State, en route to a ritual gathering of the Orca nations. Every year, the orca pods of the Northwest make the long pilgrimage to Possession Sound for the celebration. But for Lolita, the day took a tragic turn. She and 10 other family members would never make it to this or any other family reunion again. As a pod of more than 100 whales moved through the inlet, legendary orca trainer Ted Griffin and his capture team quickly gave chase. Speedboats roared out to greet the pod. An assault of explosives quickly ensued. Deafening bombs exploded around the family as boats and small aircraft attempted to herd the disoriented whales into Puget Sound's Penn Cove Inlet. Attempting to protect their young, mature whales instinctively split into 2 groups and sent decoys to distract hunters from the infants and adolescents. The decoys tried to lead the hunters on a wild chase away from the pod, but pursuers were relentless, hurling nets into the water and trapping the panicked family in Penn Cove Inlet. The air was thick with the sound of screaming whales as they thrashed in the tangled nets. Piercing shrills were heard for miles, according to local residents Lila Snover and Barbara Stevens.
Sounds they made were what we really noticed. But what you really felt were the cries of both the small ones and the adult ones. And I remember one day I stopped over there right close to them with my children that were very small at the time. And they kept saying, "Why are they crying? They're crying." It just broke your heart, everybody that saw them. And you kept wanting them to let them go. Quit harassing them.
There was a group of people that even contemplated going out in small boats, like in the dark, and trying to cut the net and set the orcas loose. But they were being guarded all day and all night by people on the boats with rifles. They would pretty much shoot anybody who showed up and tried to free them.
It was terrible. It was just terrible. You felt like it was a prison camp. It was awful. And I think everybody that remembers it will tell you that.
It's just one of the most horrible things I've ever witnessed in my life. And became dedicated to orcas in general, and Lolita particularly, since that.
Yes.
Adolescents from 2 to 7 years old, the perfect age for capture and training, were quickly separated from their mothers and prepared for extraction. While desperately trying to reach her child through the twisted nets, one mother drowns. One last glimpse of her infant being dragged away, and she closes her blowhole and sinks lifelessly into the murky water. Her body was later discovered by reporters. John Crow was just 18 when he was hired to aid in the capture, and he remembers it very well.
Corrals are set up with net going down to the bottom on all sides. And then you have to figure a way to separate the animals, because you only want the little ones. And when you see that there's some little ones on one side and maybe there's more on one side than the other, then you take off with another boat and run a net and separate those. Also, you leave a circular net out to keep some whales in it, because as long as there's one whale in captivity, the rest of them won't leave. Kind of interesting.
4 youngsters also died in the assault. While charging the nets in final attempts to reach their mothers, they drowned. But their deaths were kept from the public eye. In a covert midnight mission, the bodies were weighted and hauled out to sea for secret disposal.
They had us slit them open and fill them with rocks and put anchors on their tail, and we sank them at that point.
Their bodies mysteriously washed up on shore on November 18, 1970, making national headlines and inciting public outrage. The outrage later inspired Washington state government to ban orca captures in Puget Sound for good. Surviving youths were lashed, hoisted onto boats, and dragged to shore, never to see their family again. A family unit as old as time was suddenly crippled forever.
My job, along with another guy, was to get her in a stretcher, and that was the bad part, because that was our last whale. So as soon as we left with her, where they started breaking down the rest of the outfit, and they released them then, but they didn't leave. They came right over the beach, and they just kind of milled about there, and they were communicating back and forth with the squeaks and shrieks that they do, and they call it spy hopping now, when the whale sticks his head up and looks around, and they were doing that. Actually, I kind of broke down and started crying. I kept working, but it was really too much for me to deal with at that point. And so we kept on anyway, and got the whale loaded, and they picked it up. The instant that whale cleared the water, where the sound, I suppose, didn't transmit through the water anymore, the whole rest of the pod of whales that were there just kind of like gave a big sigh and just swam off. That was the end of that.
During the commotion at Penn Cove, the call went out to aquariums around the world proclaiming there were whales for sale in Puget Sound. It was the largest whale capture in history. 7 youngsters were caught in all. 2 went to Japan, 1 each to Texas, Australia, the UK, and France, and 1 6-year-old female to Miami. Miami, Florida, the chic, glamour, and fashion capital of the Southeast, the town that boasts a multi-billion-dollar tourism industry adopted a brand new attraction on September 14, 1970. 3,000 miles from home, the young female was unloaded and moved into her new permanent residence at the Miami Seaquarium. She was purchased for a mere $6,000 to become the second captive killer whale on display on the East Coast. Given a brand new identity, she became known as
Lolita, the killer whale.
At the Seaquarium, Lolita was temporarily reunited with Hugo, who was captured from the very same family just 2 years earlier. But he died of mysterious causes in 1980, leaving her alone. Now Lolita is the remaining survivor of the 58 whales kidnapped over the years from Puget Sound. 3 decades later, she is still the star attraction of the Seaquarium, living and performing in a tank not much larger than a hotel swimming pool. Just south of the Seaquarium lives a man whose entire life has been centered on dolphins and whales. His name is Rick O'Barry. Rick spent much of his youth working for the Miami Seaquarium, capturing and training dolphins. He developed a close relationship with the dolphin stars of the popular 1960 series Flipper. Rick quickly became the highest-paid animal trainer in the world and captured over 100 dolphins for the entertainment industry.
Well, I was 21 years old at the time, and I just started. My first day on the job was capturing dolphins in Biscayne Bay. In those days, Biscayne Bay was teeming with dolphins. They were everywhere. And in that first year, we captured over 100. And they continued capturing dolphins and depleted the bay to where it's practically empty now. You could buy them right off the Seaquarium boat for $300 a piece, or $350 if you wanted it sized and sexed. And of course, everybody wanted females. So the majority were females that we captured. And we would sort through them and take the young females, take them away from their lactating mothers many times. We sold a great many of them to the Navy, U.S. Navy. And then the Flipper TV series started, and I was promoted to Flipper's trainer, as it were. I actually captured those 7 dolphins. We ended up using 5. Kathy was the one I thought of as Flipper. We used her 99% of the time in the TV series, and when it ended, her life changed dramatically. She didn't have all this activity that she had in intermingling and so forth. Placed in a steel tank at the Seaquarium in isolation, and she died there of self-induced asphyxiation. She just didn't take the next breath. And that's how it is with dolphins and whales. They're not automatic air breathers. Every breath is a conscious effort, and they can end their life anytime they want to by not taking the next breath. The word suicide comes to mind, and that's the only word in the English language that describes that self-induced asphyxiation. I think this happens to orcas in captivity and other dolphins. I think it happens at strandings, but it's never recorded because the facility wants to put their best face forward, and so they would cover that up. But the necropsy would show something. But again, it's filled out by the vet who is loyal to the client, not the patient. When the Flipper series ended, I left for a while, and then I got a call from the manager, Burton Clark, asking me to come back, that they brought in a whale, the first killer whale in the eastern United States. His name was Hugo, and they built a special tank for him, which houses manatees today. I mean, this is like a teacup for a whale, if you can imagine. When I fed the whale, his tail would actually lie on the bottom, curled up, and his head would be completely out of the water. It was so small. And I was supposed to train him, but I refused to do that or do any show because it looked ridiculous. And I finally left in disgust.
Now Rick works for the World Society for the Protection of Animals. He focuses on dolphin releases rather than captures. And some of these releases, many of which were without permission, have thrust him directly into the media spotlight, and on numerous occasions, behind bars.
I was arrested 12 times, I remember, in 1 year, and always for the same thing, and it was always by my design, for civil disobedience. Today we know there's only 3 things killing dolphins: our pollution, our fishing nets, and our captivity. Captivity kills. I didn't know that when I was 21 years old at the Miami Seaquarium in 1961. The dolphinarium would have you believe that they came out of the sky or God put them there. But in fact, it's a very violent procedure. You have to capture them, separate them from their families, drag them literally kicking and screaming into these tanks, and their job for the rest of their life is to amuse an endless stream of people.
Conditioned to dive and breach on command, the majestic Lolita has been reduced to the level of a pathetic circus clown, a slave for human entertainment. She performs mindless tricks twice daily for the amusement of children and their camera-toting parents. It seems Lolita has become a symbol rather than a living being, a symbol of man's irrepressible desire to dominate nature.
There's a space between us and wildlife, and we haven't learned to respect that space. We are a spectator society, and that's part of the problem. We just can't leave it alone. Dolphins and whales are acoustical creatures, and their primary sense is sonar. When you capture an animal like Lolita and put her in this concrete box, you take away the 2 most important aspects of her life: her family and the world of sound. They use their sonar for capturing fish, chasing fish, for navigating, finding one another. In captivity, in isolation, in a concrete box, they don't use their sonar. There's no need for it. So this becomes a form of sensory deprivation.
To Lolita, her tank must be like an echo chamber, as her calls bounce back from the metal and concrete walls, and one must wonder how the loud music pulsing through the stadium affects her sensitive hearing. Has she been programmed to tune it all out? Maybe she even enjoys performing. After all, she is rewarded for her services.
Dolphins and whales are controlled by food in captivity. The training is controlled by food, and the trainers call this positive reward. But from Lolita's perspective, it's food deprivation. In other words, if she doesn't do what she's supposed to do, the whistle is not blown and she doesn't get the fish. If she were transferred to a natural sea pen in Puget Sound, where she came from, she wouldn't have to do these stupid dolphin tricks all day long, these monotonous. It's even monotonous for the trainers. I can tell you that, having done that show over and over and over again.
Perhaps she continues out of sheer will, hoping that if she fulfills her duties, she will one day be reunited with her family in the wild. One doesn't have to be an expert on whales to determine that Lolita is unhappy. A visit to her tank between performances or late into the night will reveal a valiant creature in distress, one who floats lifelessly in her tiny pool, alone. There are reports that she's on Prozac for her depression, but they can't be confirmed. Lolita's medical records are no longer open to the public. They became private property when she became property. Lolita and others like her were once considered to be held for the public in trust, but now she officially belongs to the Miami Seaquarium.
It's all about money.
On any given day, we've got 2,000 people coming into the park.
To date, Lolita has earned the Miami Seaquarium owners roughly $160 million in a $60 billion industry. As reward, she is housed in a deteriorating sideshow park, living in solitary confinement in the world's oldest and smallest tank. A tank that is illegal by government standards.
This is by far the worst facility in the world for orcas. It's substandard, it's illegal, and it's living proof that the system doesn't work. We had a Marine Mammal Protection Act passed in 1972 to offer protection to these animals. But the Marine Mammal Protection Act today might as well be called the Marine Mammal Park Protection Act, because that's who they protect. People are under the illusion that the National Marine Fisheries Service are there to protect the animals. The fact is, they are a regulatory agency. They issue permits, and they have approved 99.4% of all permits that cross their desk to exploit marine mammals any way you want to. That's the reality of it. They've approved permits to kill up to 7 million dolphins in the tuna fishing industry, another billion-dollar industry. Lolita's tank is clearly illegal, but nobody is doing anything about it. They're doing things to protect the corporation that are exploiting Lolita.
You've got a handful of people that, for whatever reason, don't agree with what Miami Aquarium is doing. That's fine. On any given day, we've got 2,000 people coming into the park to enjoy what we do.
According to APHIS, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, the primary enclosure for a whale Lolita's size must be a minimum of 48 feet wide in either direction, with a straight line of travel across the middle. Lolita's tank is a mere 35 feet from the front wall to the slide-out barrier. At its deepest point in the center, the tank is only 20 feet deep. Is this adequate living space for a 7,000-pound whale? Lolita's freedom fighters say absolutely not.
APHIS is one of the most useless agencies I've ever seen in my life. They're lucky if they get to inspect the seaquarium once a year.
This is former animal trainer Russ Rector. Russ helped shut down one failing park in 1994 and has been on the seaquarium's back ever since. He is growing very impatient.
These animals go into these facilities and literally are worked to death. They're worked till they're dead, and then they go get another one, and they work that one till it's dead. Back when Ocean World was going down, either a dolphin, a whale, or a seal or a sea lion died every month, nonstop, for 3 years, and nobody noticed.
So rather than wait for the U.S. government to enforce the Animal Welfare Act, Russ began investigations of his own.
The Miami Seaquarium is really showing its age. It's literally falling apart.
Here's the backside of Lolita's Whale Stadium. This is a place that they don't want the public to see. This is back in the maintenance area. There you can see Lolita's tank there. There's a show going on in there at this time. There's probably 200 or 300 people sitting in the grandstand. There's a picture of some of the piping, some of the cracking in the concrete up there with the construction jacks holding them up. You can see there's a terrible leak there that keeps it wet. There's algae growing. Those are the temporary construction jacks they had actually holding up the grandstand. It was in such a state of decay. You can see they have blocks of wood, they have sheets of plywood. There's so many of those construction jacks, it was almost like a forest under there. You had to weave your way through them. As you can see, they're just standing everywhere. And there's water standing everywhere, too. Just the mechanics running under here creates a noise level that is literally, it can almost make you nauseous. It's so strong. This truly is a facility that has outlived its time. To the right, you'll see that this is where the entire bank of electrical boxes are for the entire Whale Stadium, and there's a sign that says danger, high voltage. You can see that crack in one of the main support beams runs the entire length of the beam. You can see again construction jacks everywhere supporting the load that's trying to fall. Here's one of 3 windows in the Lolita's tank that they don't want the public to see. That's the second window, the middle window, that's leaking to the point to where algae is growing on the window. And here I am leaving after going under there and letting you see what Lolita truly lives in. If those grandstands are allowed to collapse and there's people in there, that will be truly a killer whale stadium.
They don't want to find anything wrong at these facilities because then they have to go deal with it. So the inspectors are walking around basically deaf, dumb, and blind, in my opinion. They don't want to find anything wrong. So they're just trying to ignore the fact that Lolita's the worst kept killer whale in the Americas and probably the world.
Russ's video was taken in August of 1995. 2 weeks later, the high voltage sign was simply painted over. In more recent footage, it does appear that the stadium is finally undergoing some repairs, but the jacks are still there, and so are the leaks. Across the continent, in his home office on Whidbey Island, sociologist and president of the Orca Network, Howard Garrett, responds to and logs hundreds of wild orca sightings every week. Garrett has been studying Lolita's family in the wild for some time now and has been fighting for her freedom for over 20 years.
The Seaquarium's interest is obviously to keep that revenue coming in, keep people coming to the gate. They have pictures of Lolita all over town on billboards at Miami International Airport. That's their headliner. She is their Elvis, basically, that keeps people coming. Their entire ideology, everything that they say to people that they pretend is good science or biology, is basically dedicated to keeping her there because she brings in the revenue. We have some ideas where they could make a transition into a new kind of marine park, a high-tech marine park that could have some amazing exhibits with IMAX theaters, with wraparound sound chambers, with simulated undersea experiences, traveling with the whales from within your seat. You'd be in a pod of orcas. There could be some thrilling, very exciting, and highly educational exhibits that I think are the marine park of the future. We have those suggestions. But in any case, it is not in Lolita's best interest to remain there. Out in the wild, her family travels constantly. They never slow down, even when resting. They line up side by side in their family formations and travel at a slow speed very steadily. Then when they wake up, they get boisterous, they get excited. It's a festive experience, especially if they meet up with other pods. When they've been apart, even if it's only been a day, they get together and they party. They jump up, they slap their tails, they slap their dorsal fins, they breach. It's a very exciting time. Lolita doesn't have the space to do that. Of course, she does amazing things. She can breach out of the water on cue. She has that energy somehow, but she doesn't have the room to keep up that level of exercise. She tries, though, and this is something that is incredibly insightful into her character. She does laps. She does exercise. She races around and around, throws water out of the tank. She gets her exercise that way. That's the only way she can. It's doing one constant U-turn in that tight little tank. So that's how she maintains her stamina and I think her ability to survive after all the others have died years and years ago.
Since that fateful day in 1970, waves of controversy have pounded the shores of both Washington State and the city of Miami, as legions of Lolita supporters joined Garrett in his plea with the park to build a larger tank or retire their star attraction. Heather Lishan, operations manager for the Animal Rights Foundation of Florida, also known as ARF, has made Lolita's liberation a top priority.
The Animal Rights Foundation of Florida got involved in the campaign to free Lolita because she's really symbolic of all animals in captivity.
If Lolita were retired to the ocean, could she readapt to her old environment? What are her chances of survival? Slim, according to Arthur Hertz, CEO of Wometco, owners of the Miami Seaquarium. He and other officials believe she is safer where she is. Requests to interview them on the issues have been denied.
All of them, 100% of them, can be readapted to a more normal environment. That is, taken out of this concrete chlorinated box and put into a natural sea pen where Lolita could once again experience the natural rhythms of the sea and the tide and the current and hear her family, and then possibly one day actually go there and connect up with them. That's not a very difficult thing to do, you know. Arthur Hertz would tell you, well, Lolita's going to die if we do that. Going to die in transport, in the airplane. The fact is, this captive industry moves their whales around, SeaWorld, for example, from their parks in California, Florida, and so forth, Texas, all the time. None have ever been lost in transport, so that isn't a problem. As far as Lolita dying, trying to connect up with her family, well, look where she is today. She's on death row, in the process of dying. My biggest fear is that they're just going to keep Lolita there and keep doing these shows until the day she dies. They're just going to keep milking every dollar they can out of this animal, and that's really sad.
Once these animals are taken into captivity, it's a death sentence. They don't release them. They don't let them work. Well, okay, we're going to let you work for 15 years, then we're going to retire and you can leave. These animals go into these facilities and literally are worked to death. They're worked till they're dead, and then they go get another one. And they work that one till it's dead.
They occasionally will put out this dusty old scale model of this new tank they're going to build.
Oh, this is just something to put them in. We're going to build them this lavish, big, huge thing, and they came out with that model that they've been dragging around for 20 years.
Lolita the killer whale has been part of the Miami Seaquarium family for more than 3 decades. We have secured construction permits and plans are underway to build a new habitat for her.
It's the big lie. And if you were to go to Key Biscayne Chamber of Commerce and talk to them, they will tell you they will never approve another tank on Key Biscayne.
In fact, in January, they admitted on the air that the tourism revenues are down. They don't even have the cash if they intended to do it in the first place.
They're simply going to do a show and another show and another show and keep doing that until she dies. That's their plan.
The controversy over Lolita's retirement increased after the 1993 release of the Warner Brothers film Free Willy, in which a killer whale was captured in Puget Sound, sold to a marine park, and finally rescued by a young boy. Ironically, Willy, played by the real whale Keiko, was living in a rundown park in Mexico City before the film's production. But due to efforts of producer Richard Donner, along with the Free Willy Foundation and the Humane Society of the United States, Keiko has become the first captive killer whale to be successfully retired to his home waters.
Keiko, the Free Willy whale, is back in his home, and he has defied all of those naysaying predictions that he wouldn't like the ocean, that he would prefer human contact. He immediately explored every nook and cranny. His whole body language improved. He began breaching, he got very, very active, and he has stayed that way.
Scientists continue to monitor Keiko. After being released from the Icelandic sea pen, he swam over 800 miles to a Norwegian fjord, where he is foraging and socializing with wild pods, and finally making his own decisions. The Seaquarium recently applied for a permit to recapture Keiko and bring him to Miami, presumably to put him on display with Lolita. They claim that he's at risk to himself and the boaters and should be rescued. The Norwegian government shot the Seaquarium down. Officials in charge of Keiko's welfare say they'll do everything in their power to keep him from going back to any tank. They're hoping that Keiko is setting new precedents for other captive whales, like Lolita.
He has responded beautifully. He is healthier, he is stronger than he has ever been, and he's gone out and visited with the whales, traveled along with them. The trouble is he hasn't located his close family. With Lolita's situation, that's a picnic. There's no problem, no issue at all. We know her family. We watch them on a daily basis 6 months of every year. From the vocalizations that Lolita makes in her tank, both under the water and sometimes even through the air, those have been recorded and they've been matched up with the vocalizations of the wild whales. Her mother is one of several females, some of which are still alive today, that are in what is known as the L25 subpod. So she is a member of that matriline, that multi-generational group of whales. So it would be no problem at all to get them in close enough range to hear each other, and then that vocal recognition would take over, and we presume and believe that she would resume her place in that family.
In the wild, orca have a life expectancy about the same as humans, but in captivity, even in the best conditions, they rarely make it to their teens. Lolita is simply remarkable. After more than 3 decades in captivity, she still appears to be in good physical condition. But could the world's oldest performing whale simply be too old to go home?
In the wild, the females average 50 years of age. And we have 2 out there that are estimated to be over 90 years old. Great-great-grandmas. And they're out there with their families. And you know, you can't tell by looking. They're just as active. They travel 75 to 100 miles every 24 hours. They make the calls. They say which way to go. They say where the fish are. They have that long-term memory, just as Lolita still has that long-term memory.
A 1-hour ferry ride and a short trip through the countryside of San Juan Island leads us to the doorstep of the Center for Whale Research, where we meet the marine biologist Ken Balcombe.
There's L94.
Ken is an expert on killer whales. He's been studying Lolita's family for 2 decades while constructing a detailed plan for her rehabilitation in Puget Sound.
We're really interested in Lolita because she spent that real formative part of her life with her family. The first 6 years were out there. And, so she had a lot of her education, all of her language skills, everything that her society could teach her, she already knew. It wasn't like she was pulled out of there as an infant and never allowed to develop. So she's remarkable. She's one that ought to... She's made the money for those guys. She's paid for her retirement too. She speaks her language. She's in her tank, but she doesn't have anybody to talk to. They have very intense feelings for one another, and contact and touch and being together is a real important part of their life. She probably came from this matriline, but now with her younger sister gone, there's no producing females left there. If she came back there, had her mom, had her brothers, and she does have a very much younger sister, 7 years old now, or 9 years old, that between them, you know, they could be the future of the pod. It's not just an interesting idea, it's a worthwhile one. If she just dies in that place, it's just a gloomy thought, really, that we would, in this century, with all the enlightenment we have about freedoms and equalities and humanity toward other creatures, that we would allow that to continue. It's just absurd.
Lolita is an intelligent and social being, requiring wide open spaces. She wasn't designed for captivity, yet she is still trapped in the world's oldest and smallest tank, living under the guise of education.
She's not living, she's simply surviving. There's a difference. Living is doing things. Living is chasing fish. It's cooperatively feeding. It's, moving around 100 miles throughout the day. That's what living is all about. She is simply surviving in this tank, and she's on death row. Lolita and other dolphins and whales are self-aware creatures. They routinely make choices and decisions regarding the details of their life. They are entitled to freedom of choice. Thus, Lolita is entitled to freedom. Capturing her and dragging her kicking and screaming into that concrete box is simply wrong. What a violation of nature, and what hypocrisy to say we're capturing these dolphins and bringing them to the Miami Seaquarium or SeaWorld or some other park so that we can teach you respect for nature.
Come to the place where whales and dolphins fly, where creatures lurk, and where the forecast for fun is always scattered showers and 55 degrees. Miami Seaquarium, your window to the world of the sea.
What is that? It's so obvious that this show is nothing more than a spectacle of dominance. That's all it really is. And it teaches us that dominance is good, dominance is right, dominance works. And that's really the danger. That's the biggest problem. Because it's not just an animal rights issue, it's an issue about education and people. It's about the millions of people who come through there every year and learn that it's okay to abuse nature. As long as we call it education and research, you can literally get away with murder.
With respect to the question of education at marine parks, it's bogus. It's basically like having Walt Disney tell you how rodents' biology works. It's fantasy. It's not real.
In 1996, politicians in Washington formally requested that Lolita be retired and returned home to Puget Sound. The question remains, will the people and politicians of Florida ever honor that request?
The governor of the state of Washington, Mike Lowry, who was governor at the time, was sympathetic to the cause and joined with me and the Secretary of State, Ralph Monroe, in announcing that Washington would welcome Lolita back home. It was kind of a gesture that we hoped Florida would somehow recognize and respond to. We didn't have overwhelming political support, And of course we had zero support from Arthur Hertz. I think if we'd had a lot of cash, we would have had his support.
In 1995, Jerry Powers, publisher of Miami's Ocean Drive magazine, launched a major campaign broadcasting Lolita's plight. He also offered Arthur Hertz $1 million to secure her retirement. But why? Jerry says it was a reluctant visit to the seaquarium that had a very powerful effect on him.
This beautiful, unbelievable whale comes out of the water. And there were families, and people were smiling, and some people weren't smiling. And for me, it had this unbelievable impression. And looking around, I mean, I didn't take a poll or a survey, but I wasn't smiling. I was, like, really sad. It was like a moment that I had when I was a kid, and like I went to a circus, it might have been a Ringling Brothers circus, and the elephants came out. And to me, it was a tragedy, while other people were like laughing. I guess I saw something that was so out of whack with how I felt that I immediately came back to my office, and I wanted to find out if there were any people who felt like I did. So I started looking up clipping services, and I saw there was this whole movement going on to free Lolita. Who was Lolita? Where did Lolita come from? Was she born in the tank? I didn't know any of it. I never knew much about whales. But it heightened so much my awareness that I ultimately found a guy named Ken Balcom, and he told me he had approached the Seaquarium and said, could we at least, at minimum, do some soundings in the tank between the population of whales still in the Seattle area and see if there's any voice recognition from the family that we still believe that lives in the wild and Lolita. And he said that Arthur Hertz turned him down. He asked me if I would go see him. So I made an appointment with Arthur Hertz. He didn't know what it was about. And I went to his office, and we sat down, and we started to talk. And I had noticed right away, right behind him, was a picture of him and Lolita. And I noticed automatically that he had so much pride that the picture of his family was like this big, and the picture of him and Lolita was like this big. It was the biggest picture behind his desk. And so right away, something happened to me. I knew that Arthur Hertz loved Lolita. There was no question in my mind about it. But the difference between Arthur Hertz and me was he loved Lolita in the tank, and I loved Lolita in the wild. And that was enormous for me to find that out. And we started to talk about it, and I said, Arthur, and I saw he was all business. And, you know, and let's face it, without Lolita, there wouldn't be much of a seaquarium. And I tried to approach him in terms of what he was doing, and I said, and I'm a promotional guy. I publish a magazine, I run events and parties, and I know what makes press, and I'm pretty good at that stuff. And I said, Arthur, do you know that if you released Lolita, and I put together the funding of about $1 million to make a movie of the release, one, I think you'd be the man of the year in Time magazine. Two, I think you could build a big IMAX cinema right on the site and show this film of how Lolita got released, and you could continually update it and everything. And I came up with all these ideas. And I said, three, I know your insurance policy on Lolita is only $1 million. We'll buy her for $1 million, because she's going to die in the tank one morning. It could be tomorrow, it could be whatever, but it's going to happen. And he was so uninto it and so unresponsive to it and so closed-minded about everything. And before the meeting was over, he pretty much threw me out of his office because I just kept going. I wouldn't stop because I knew that, like, now that he knew where I was, he wasn't going to meet with me again. That was like my one and only meeting with him. And I tried everything. And I left him, and I threatened him, and I said that we were going to put together a campaign in our magazine about the release of Lolita. And I said, I'm going to spend the next 2 or 3 years on this. And immediately afterwards, we started a whole campaign. I devoted a great part of 2 years of my life. I made a 2-year commitment where my magazine, my business, my media contacts, my clients, my celebrity friends, people like Richard Donner, who did the Superman movies, and a whole lot of other people. I got Sylvester Stallone. I got like a whole lot of people who involved in this thing in a big, big way for 2 years to put so much pressure on this guy. We slammed him. They tell me that Lolita still has a shot if she was released to, you know, give birth. You know, that ain't gonna happen in the tank. Without being too cynical, one morning, Arthur Hertz, or whatever Hertz is running the show at the time, is gonna wake up and find Lolita dead in the tank. Then what? He collects his insurance money. What's he gonna do? Why can't he look to greatness?
About the same time that Power's campaign was launched, school children from around the world united to form Lolita's Legion, a global internet campaign focused on her release. Thousands of letters swamped the Seaquarium mailbox, but Hertz still wouldn't budge. But the freedom fighters refused to give up. On Mother's Day, animal rights activists from around the country descended upon the Seaquarium for their annual protest.
The Miami Seaquarium is under fire again from a handful of critics tonight.
Now, those critics insist the marine park is putting human perks ahead of animal care.
I've chosen this day to protest Lolita's freedom because it is a day of compassion, a day when all mothers in the world should make sure that all defenseless creatures, whether they're children, animals, or elderly, are protected. We have kept Lolita in the size of a bathtub for over 30 years. It is cruel. When you expose children to cruelty and you tell them it is entertainment, you damage their souls. It is unbecoming of human beings to stand by where animals are being treated with cruelty. And it is unbecoming of a mother to celebrate her day showing this to her children.
They are literally captive creatures of a beast, the captivity industry, and they're not going to let these animals go. And that's a hard thing to understand. The only thing you can do is close or kill the facility to stop the killing. Once the facility is gone, like Ocean World is a very nice parking lot now. There's no more dolphins and whales dying at Ocean World, being killed there, literally worked to death.
Well, we know what the problem is now. What's the solution? How do we fix this? This is a billion-dollar industry, and it's based on supply and demand, just like any other product. If we can educate the consumers and they become responsible, perhaps they won't buy a ticket. And that's the solution. Don't buy a ticket. That's the best peaceful, nonviolent way to beat this industry.
So courageous and so gentle. Is it simply Lolita's fate to die in that miserable tank? Or will she one day swim free again with her family in the wild? Removed from universal nature, civilized man surveys the animal kingdom through the foggy glass of his limited knowledge and perceives a whole image distorted. Upon our pedestal, we patronize them for their tragic fate of having taken form so far below our own. We use them as a resource and exploit them for profit, and therein we err, and greatly err, for the animal is not measurable by man. They are not inferiors or underlings. They are other nations, caught with our own in the net of life. As intelligent, rational beings, we have a moral obligation to cherish and respect all life. Until we do, Lolita, like so many others, will remain a slave to entertainment.
Every time you put your money down to walk in there, that ensures that she's going to spend that much more time in captivity.
The suffering is obvious. She needs to come back. The suffering is what kills virtually every whale in captivity.
She's earned it. She had to go home and miss his home.
If you feel something about this, even if it's a small feeling, you know that you're right in your heart.
Don't buy a ticket.
You don't think Lolita's happy here?
Why would anybody be happy in a bathtub?